Welcome back to OpenLine. Talking about the Tennessee General Assembly. It's in session, really about halfway through. Lots of bills on the table. We're talking with state and government reporter Joel Ebert with Tennessean, and immigration. One of the big issues on the national scene in the presidential race. What are we seeing in Tennessee?
It's sort of piecemeal efforts. There's a couple of bills that are particularly about the E-Verify program. Essentially, that's the effort to verify that a company is not hiring people that are not from the United States. There was one bill in particular today that was discussed in committee. It sounds like there's competing bills, one sponsored by Representative Jeremy Durham and another sponsored by, I'm forgetting who it is right now, but essentially that would try and increase the penalties for those that violated the E-Verify program. It received a little bit of pushback because the concern is some of these people that miss on the E-Verify program, it might be a mistake. You might be a new business owner and you might have just forgot to tell the person that you hired on the first day, bring your driver's license. So, you know, there's some individual efforts like that have been dealing with immigration.
We haven't even talked about Jeremy Durham, and maybe we will in a moment. That was certainly big news at the top of the session, at the beginning of the session, but we're a very red state, obviously. How does that manifest itself with the bills that you're seeing, and even the dynamic there in the legislature? I mean, do you see a lot of pushback against the federal government, lots of bills along those lines? How does it manifest itself that we are such a red state?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's instead of fighting between Republicans and Democrats, it's fighting between Republicans. So you've got a more extreme or further right portion fighting against moderates. And so there have been examples of you know, some lawmakers saying, you know what, we're not happy with the decisions made by the Supreme Court. And so we need to either pass a resolution or you know, a bill that would essentially stress that. One of those early on was I believe they called it the Natural Marriage Bill, and this was essentially an effort to you know, express disagreement with the federal government's or the legalization of same-sex marriage. There have been several individual you know, pushback. We don't want the feds to encroach on our territory. And to go back to the refugee resettlement lawsuit, that's essentially what that is to say that the federal government is making us do something as a state that we don't want to do.
It's interesting that there would be those types of bills, and then at the same time, when a municipality or local government within Tennessee passes something, there would be kind of a mandate on the part of the legislature to say, no, you can't do that, whether it be guns in parks or that kind of thing. That would seem to be. Now, when you start talking about this, where the fights are now, it's not really Democrat-Republican,
right,
because there's so few Democrats.
Right.
So it is Republican, I guess, against Republican. There are a group of moderate Republicans? I mean, is it identified as such?
Yeah, I mean, I really think so. For example, you can look at something like, let's take the guns in the Capitol bill. That wasn't really a bill, but that was an idea that Lieutenant Governor Ramsey said, you know what, I want guns in the Legislative Plaza. And him and Speaker Harwell and Governor Haslam were having conversations about that idea. Governor Haslam said, we don't think that's necessarily a good idea. And Ramsey said, no, I think it is. But through conversations, that ended up being, we're not going to do anything about that. And so I think that's just one example of somebody, you know, one Republican saying, you know, we want to push a little bit further to the right versus Governor Haslam saying we need to pull back a little bit on some of those ideas.
And where does Beth Harwell, the Speaker of the House, fit in with that?
Harwell has been fairly quiet. She, you know, everybody is wondering, is she going to run for governor in the future? She was not on board with the guns in the Legislative Plaza, it sounds like. She initially had conversations and was discussing it, but she agreed that she thinks we should wait until next year when the legislature could move to a new building to implement that policy. So she's really just kind of stayed low on some of these more controversial issues, though.
So that's not going to happen. Guns in Legislative Plaza.
Not this year. No.
Because I thought it was initially proposed as a joke, but now they're serious.
It was very serious. Yeah.
Okay. So but that's apparently not okay. All right, Roosevelt. Hello, Roosevelt.
Yes.
Go right ahead.
I was thinking that they were going to get me after the break. How are you all this evening?
Great. Go right ahead.
Okay. I am from Alabama. My brother-in-law ran for city council here in the 60s. And when I shared with him the current things that were coming up about housing, education, and transportation, he became tickled. And coming from Alabama, there are some concerns I have in reference to housing. I've seen the video at the Peabody College at Vanderbilt about the housing in Chicago, and that this, I think, city is the next stop. I have a memory of losing our property during the 60s era, the conflict from the 60s era. And I have no apologies for this because a lot of the civil rights activists today are not able to identify with this. But I understand how it has affected the interpersonal communication systems in the development of family life. And I think a lot of these things are connected to how well the different leaders and things are able to interact with government in order to reach some understanding with a lot of things. So I wonder what you all think about that.
Well, I worry they're not talking too much about it at the legislature, but what do you think about what he's saying?
Yeah, I mean, there hasn't been too much talk about that in the Legislative Plaza. There have been some initiatives on affordable housing, but, again, they haven't really gone anywhere. I think that's kind of the large theme so far of the legislature is there's been a lot of discussion, but no real movement thus far. So it's interesting.
Do you think that means they're just going to pass everything in the dead of night in a big final session?
I think we're going to have...
You're going to be all blurry-eyed. You're not going to be able to write it all down. And all these things are going to be passed. We're not even going to know what's happening.
I think it's going to be a very hectic end to the session, yeah. Because I think, again, the election is weighing really heavy in people's minds that, I need to really define for my constituents what I'm doing for them in the legislature.
And I believe we have another caller. Caroline, is that right? Carol, go right ahead.
Yeah, I was just, you were mentioning about Tennessee being such a red state.
Yes.
Could that be a result of how redistricting has happened and that we have really just succeeded from the union?
All right, I don't know about the last part. Redistricting is probably part of it. Certainly we didn't always used to be a red state. We used to be very democratic. The legislature used to be incredibly democratic, run completely by Democrats. It's not the case now. And so it's a remarkable change. And I covered it when it was Jimmy Nafee and it was primarily Democratic. Now it's, I'm sure, just very different. And I'm interested in the fights, which there used to be fights between rural lawmakers and more city lawmakers, and it wasn't as much Democrat-Republican. Then it became very partisan, and now it's right-wing Republican, I guess, and more moderate Republican. It's a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's entirely redistricting that you could place it on that makes this such a red state now. But I think a lot of it is just, I was talking to a member of the Republican Party, the state, party, and they essentially were saying, we think it's the quality of candidates. We think it's the quality of ideas out there, that they believe that the state and the voters out there have really started to align themselves more with Republican ideals as opposed to the Democrats who they were criticizing and saying they've tried the same thing over and over again. And again, I heard the same thing when I was covering the West Virginia legislature that just now became a legislature run by Republicans, where you really just see this rhetoric of the ideas that Democrats have had for 50, 60, 70 years have gotten these states to where they were, and now people are ready for a change. So, I'm not really sure if it's redistricting or just people yearning for a long-term change. But
all right, we're going to take a break. Come back. We'll be back right after this.